Yeah, great. Okay. Okay, so to start with, I'll be discussing the SNAP 2016 analysis here, and the exam that was conducted today. So I will be just doing a bit of an analysis, a review kind of a thing, and we will see the cutoffs for your top 3 or 4 Symbiosis institutes at the very end. Okay. To start with, the overview of the test. Again, as they had already mentioned, there were supposed to be 150 questions worth 150 marks. The analytical reasoning part with 2 marks per question was done away with, but the rest of the things remained the same. Again, you had 4 options and +1 minus 0.25 for each incorrect answer. So again, pretty simple. There were 4 sections, again similar to what was there in SNAP 2015. More questions with less weight from AR. So earlier SNAP used to have analytical reasoning section, which used to have 30 questions, and these 30 questions were worth 60 marks. Now this year the weight came down and you had 40 questions worth 40 marks. Fewer questions from GK. Yes, so we had 40 questions last year from GK, although it was a tad difficult, but we had 40 questions nonetheless. This time the number of questions in GK came down to 30 questions, and so it was an even 150 paper. The first impressions that we had, so after the test, as soon as I got done with the test, it looked as if it was easier than last year. So I had heard a lot of reviews. I took this test after 6 years, so I hadn't taken it last year, but I had read a lot of reviews. I interacted with a lot of people who had taken it last year, and I had gone with the expectation that the paper is going to be difficult and the cutoff would be somewhere around 40 to 50% of the marks. That was my expectation from the paper. But as soon as I came out, the paper seemed to be a bit easier compared to last year. So it was not an out and out speed test like say a CET or probably an NMAT or something like that, or a MAT or a CMAT. It was not like that. It was of course a tad difficult, but on the other hand, it was definitely easier compared to say an IIFT or probably a CAT. Of course a CAT under that, but of course even in comparison to an IIFT, the paper was slightly easier. That's what I felt. So my first impression was the paper was easier, definitely easier compared to last year. A good part of that easier came because of the GK section, which was at least doable. People could at least fight it through. Not like last year when a lot of people gave up, and of course that had to be the case. So it was definitely easier than last year. But the marks would be out of 150 instead of 180. So out of 180, even if last year we say that the cutoffs were somewhere around 70 marks for your SIBM and SCMHRD, that was roughly 40% of the total score that you would have got. Even in an easier GK section, you would have probably got 10 or 12 marks more. So your overall marks would be somewhere around 45%. So even if we apply that same logic this year, your score would be somewhere around 45 to 50%. That would be the target. So that was the initial impression, that 50% in this paper would have been a good score. Now, to have a look at the basic strategy that was there, the paper, of course, it remained a speed test. And so, as is the case in any speed test, selecting the easier questions is extremely important. And of course, you cannot get carried away and say that it's a speed test, so I have to attempt everything and anything that is there in front of me. It cannot really be the case. So selecting the easier questions, and there were a lot of easy questions in this paper. That was very important. And of course, being extremely accurate in these questions, because your easier questions will have some traps. So as we will see in the other parts of this video or the other sections as well, there were quite a few traps in this paper. The paper was not at all straightforward, and I don't know, there is no paper which is extremely straightforward, but this was especially tricky, and probably a few silly mistakes are inevitable in this kind of a paper. So being accurate was extremely important. The ideal split in hindsight, of course, would have been to do GK for about 10 to 15 minutes somewhere in that paper. So I for one start with GK because I tend to forget as the time progresses. So of course, I'm better off at time t than at time t+2. So I definitely use GK right at the first. Then VARC would have been done in 25 to 30 minutes, should not have been difficult. If you would have finished these 2 sections in around 40 minutes, then probably the remaining 80 minutes could have been split into 40-40 for quant DI and analytical reasoning. So that should have been the ideal split. Yeah. Okay, so whoever is joining you, can you just keep yourself on mute? Yeah, I muted everything. Anyway. Okay. So a lot of easy questions were carefully hidden. So I would come to this, especially in quant and probably analytical reasoning as well. In quant, there were quite a few questions which were hidden carefully. So I had 2 DI sets, both the DI sets that were present. There was a nice, easy quant question in between those 2 sets. or probably there were 2 or 3 extremely difficult questions, and probably there was an easy question somewhere sandwiched between these two. So there were a lot of easy questions that were hidden, and there were a few good traps in the paper. And someone who could spot those traps, I would especially say for myself, because I could spot those traps and the kind of questions that we designed, it was an impressive performance, especially in a few questions. A lot of questions probably didn't make sense and were pretty ambiguous to start with. They could not really convey what they wanted to say. But then again, there were a few questions which were very well designed. GK was of course easier, and a lot of people would probably have started with GK, or probably it would have been the first or the second section for a lot of people. So a lot of people would have been happy looking at that GK. Of course, after hearing all these horror stories from last year wherein people were simply unable to crack GK, a lot of people would have felt that GK was definitely doable this year. So again, the kind of morale that you would derive, the kind of positive feeling that you would derive would have been immense, and that would probably have carried throughout the paper. Just that QA was a sticky wicket, and QA DI generally in Snap, whenever Snap used to be easy, so this was around the 2010, 2011, when the cutoffs used to go till 100, 105 out of 180. So that was the period wherein quant used to be extremely easy. People used to attempt around 35, 36 questions in quant. But this year it was extremely difficult. Probably even getting more than 20 attempts in quant was a bit, as in it was a big deal this year. And the questions were not difficult per se, but then again, selection would have been very important, because if you start doing a question, then probably you will require around 1.5, 2 minutes probably to solve these questions. And you cannot really invest 40 minutes and try to do 40 questions, simply because, yeah, okay. So simply because you would not be able to solve all 40 questions in 40 minutes. That's the basic thing. So you could solve around 20, 25 questions max, and that should have been it. VA and AR were as usual. So analytical reasoning was as abstract as it always has been. So Snap probably prides itself on the fact that they can make a weird analytical reasoning section, and there were a few scoring opportunities. It was not difficult, but there were a few questions which had an extremely abstract logic attached to it. So not really a great way to do stuff. And VA on the other hand, again, it was fairly easy, and normally, however, it has been. So VA has never been a pain area in that paper, and it's remained that way. The important thing here was there was a +1 and -0.25 in a 4-option paper. So generally, whenever we say a 4-option paper, like is seen in CAT, the ideal negative should be -1/3. So positive should be +1, negative should be -1/3. This is simply because of the fact that if you blindly mark 4 answers, say if I mark 4 consecutive answers as say B, the chances of me getting positive marks is 0. The probability is 0. But if you have a 4-option paper, and if you have a +1 and -0.25, it essentially means that you are playing positively. So people who were good at these things, people who probably saw these things, and people who are kind of into these kind of things, whenever they look at a paper and are looking to boost their overall score, they would have probably made use of it. Although I don't know how many people would do this, but then again, whenever we used to have a similar kind of situation in the FMS entrance test, so a long time back, 2011, we used to have a separate test for FMS, and the FMS test was exactly like this. It had a +4, -1 marking strategy, and there were 4 options. So a lot of people used to mark those remaining 30, 40, 50 questions, whatever are left, with the hope that, of course, it will play in their favor, and it used to in most of the cases. In these kind of situations wherein 1 or 2 or probably 3 marks will make a big difference, probably someone could have thought of it and would have gone for it, and it would probably have benefited. I would not say for certain, but definitely there was a good chance that you would have benefited from this. But then again, it was something which is in hindsight, so I don't really know how many people did it. Now, coming to the sections, if you look at GK, of course, they promised something this year. They had said that the questions would be based on current affairs, and they would be from the last 2 years. So 2014 to 16 is what they had thought of, and probably 2014 to 16 was what it was during the test. A lot of questions very easy. So we had ran a sprint series, and even people would have appeared for tests like say IFT or even MyCat last week. So a lot of questions were probably not lifted, I would say, but they were fairly recent, and they were fairly well known. So these kind of questions were present, and even if I write down here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions I could simply think of in one line, and all the 6 questions should have been solved by people who were probably looking at Snap as a viable option. So the one with Jabong and Flipkart and Myntra, that question was a similar question came in IFT. So you should have known which precedes which one and who acquired what. LinkedIn Microsoft was again a question which was repeated from MyCat last week. Joe Biden, I guess people knew about it. Oscar Pistorius, again a very famous thing, a trial that ran for probably the last year or so. So people would have been extremely, people would know about these things. Nana Kidwai, Bob Dylan again. Bob Dylan was something which was lifted from MyCat. So MyCat had a question which had Bob Dylan in it. So people could have easily linked the sections and probably could have scored a few marks. Of course, as always, a good strategy would have been to run through the section. So it does not really help if you are looking at this section and you are probably just thinking about stuff during this section. It's not really a great strategy. So as always, if you could have just seen the question, if you knew the answer, great. If you didn't know, question number 2. If you didn't know, question number 3, and so on. That would have been the ideal strategy. Along the way, you would have realized that you know about 10 or 12 questions. That would have happened with a lot of aspirants. And of course, once we know that we are clearing the cutoff. So even if there are sectional cutoffs, there aren't any sectional cutoffs. But whenever they used to be sectional cutoffs, the cutoffs used to be somewhere around the 20% mark in okayish GK sections like today's. So if you have scored somewhere above 6, or if you have scored above 6, then you are on safe ground in whatever case that comes up. So someone who would have gotten into double digits could have again gambled and have done a few 50-50 questions also. So that would have been a good strategy. First round, you do all the questions, just have a look at whatever you have done. If you have done 10-12 questions, great. You can attempt some 4 or 5 questions, and even if you get those wrong, you are not really in big trouble. So that could have been the strategy. Again, around 10 questions, I think a lot of you would have got around 10 questions with a very good amount of accuracy. So 8 to 9 marks out of 10, whatever the 10-12 questions that you have solved, that would be a fair attempt, I would say. A lot of people would be getting 8 to 9 marks is what I'm hoping for, considering the kind of resources that were there. The thing that they had said that they would ask only current affairs and not really static GK. So that was there. Someone who would have scored around 12 would be great, and 15 plus would be a brilliant score. So 15 plus, very few people would have got 15 plus. Yeah. Okay. So 15 plus would have been a great score in this section. Okay. So that was about GK. Now coming to the analytical reasoning section, the analytical reasoning section, it has always been the case that people find it difficult or abstract or probably interesting in some cases. So of course it's interesting because there are a lot of puzzles to be solved. It's not really a good thing that it comes at the expense of time. So you cannot really sit on this section for 40 minutes, 1 hour, or 50 odd minutes and hope to do well in the test as a whole. So again, as expected, it was almost entirely of puzzles. I didn't really see the famed something like the famed WhatsApp puzzle or something which was there last year, but the puzzles were pretty run-of-the-mill stuff. So if you would have seen a few puzzles, then you would know what to expect. The good thing is the input-output question was very easy. Should have been cracked. Great, highest number, least number, second highest number, second lowest number, and so on. It was not very difficult. All 4 questions were extremely straightforward. And again, the questions were not ambiguous as such. You could have got your answers in 2 or 3 or 4 steps max. And so it should not have taken a lot of time. So that was a must attempt question. The series based questions were extremely difficult, I felt. So there was a series based question which said 1, 2, 8, minus 10 and question mark. So you cannot really expect to solve these kind of questions. One question was J, S, F, M, M, T, W, something like that. And then again, it doesn't really make sense because the logic was January, Sunday, February, Monday, March, Tuesday, something like that, I think. So we cannot really sit on these kind of questions during the test. And it was very painful. So series questions, especially, they were very difficult. And I don't know how many people would have done series-based questions. So they were better left alone. So whatever 3 or 4 series questions were there, I think just one was probably doable after. Other than that, the rest were better left alone. magic cubes or whatever, the 3 by 3, 4 by 4 squares that we have, magic numbers. Those questions were also difficult. One or two were very easy. 2 into 2 minus 1, which gives us 3. 3 into 2 minus 1, which gives us 5, and so on. That was the easy question. One or two were again difficult. They were not very straightforward. So again, if you are not really great at these things, it was better to leave these questions alone instead of getting stuck. Visual reasoning, I don't really know what they were trying to achieve by asking these questions. So one of the first few questions in my paper was when they formed a Z with 3 arrows, then they formed an A with 3 arrows, then they formed a Y with 3 arrows. That at least had some logic. The next figure would have been one of the arrows was moving at 270 degrees, the other was at 45 degrees, and so on. So there was some logic to it. But the one with the circle, which again got changed into an amoeba kind of a thing, then it became over and then something like that. That was again, which was kind of gibberish. I didn't really know what to, what was expected from that kind of a thing. So again, there was no reasoning, I would say, yeah. So it was not really clear what they wanted to test by asking such questions. But then again, of course, if you were not clear, you should have left those questions alone. They were not very difficult to understand and look at, so probably you could have left them alone. Coding decoding questions were easier. Of course, they were very easy. So we had quite a few coding decoding questions, a few based on blood relations. So if A plus B says that A is the parent of B or something like that, or A is the brother of B, then what represents maternal uncle? Or the other one which said that 3 minus 2 is equal to 6, then 3 minus whatever, something minus something is equal to something. So there was a pattern there, minus plus multiplication, and so 35 minus 5 would have been 35 by 5 or something like that. So those questions were very easy. The questions were not very difficult from coding and decoding, and they should have been attempted. Standalone puzzles were easy, could have been attempted. They were not very difficult. So the only pain point here was the magic cubes and the series-based questions. So magic cubes and series-based questions, if you could have left those. Visual reasoning, if you could have figured out some logic to it, then of course could have attempted. But these 3 types were present that you should have left away. Rest of the questions were not very difficult, to be very frank. So a good candidate, and whatever the people who are present at my center as well, a few of our students as well, good candidates could have attempted somewhere around 25 questions in this section. Discounting for your series-based questions, 3 or 4 series-based questions, 3 or 4 magic cubes, 3 or 4 visual reasoning questions. Even if you had let go of all these questions, even then you could have attempted somewhere around 25 questions. And of course, the accuracy is bound to be pretty high because there has to be some logic behind an answer. You cannot really write anything and get away with it. So a score of around 22 to 23 marks would be a fair score. Okay, would be a fair score. Anything around 25 to 27 marks would be a good score. So I would say that 25, if you cross 25, then probably you are in the safe zone. So ideally the split would be something like you will get 1/3 of your marks in verbal, around 10 marks in your GK, and the rest of the marks, whatever you require, would be split equally between AR and QADR. So that would ideally be this split. 1/3 of the marks will come from verbal. That's what it will look like. So if you are scoring somewhere around 25, 26 in verbal, you can probably be hopeful of getting somewhere around 77, 78 marks. So that is something which I could probably figure out during the test. That's something which looks like it would be likely. So if you are scoring somewhere around 25, 27 or even 27 plus in this section, then you are on extremely firm footing. I think you already have a foot inside at least the GDPI room. That would be a fair thing to say, to be frank, if you are crossing 25 in this section. Coming to the section which probably a lot of people enjoy the most, even I enjoy solving quant questions, and it probably comes naturally to a lot of people, right? People are really looking forward to solving math questions because they practice it a lot. But today it was probably the most intensive section, if I have to say that thing. It was not really as friendly as probably someone would have expected. Okay, so out of 40 questions, the questions were doable per se. So if you had spent say 1 hour or probably 1 hour 10 minutes on that section, I think a lot of you would have solved 30 plus questions. 30, 35 was not really difficult a number to solve. But then again, to solve these questions in whatever the allotted 35, 40 minutes was a tough task, along with the OMR marking. So and that again, of course, because it was a pen-based marking system, it always helps to be careful, and so people are a bit alert when they're doing that. So that again takes a few moments out of your out of the time that you are solving your paper. So again, quant was a tad difficult, and in hindsight, the ideal approach should have been to select the 20 easiest questions. So that should have been the benchmark. So again, you cannot really select 20 questions at the start and then do those 20 questions, but probably you could have looked at an average of one question every for every couple of questions, or 2 questions out of 4, something like that. If you were along that path, then you would have probably been doing well. If you got stuck somewhere and you could not reach the last question, then it would have been disastrous. So I saw a lot of people who had solved sub 20 questions, so 17, 18, 19. A lot of good candidates have solved around 20 questions in this section. So of course it was a bit difficult. That's what I could figure out from the reviews. Again, as I said in the first slide, a lot of questions were carefully hidden, if I have to say that. So there was an easy question. Someone walks from A to B, and that person comes back using a bike from B to A. And then again, in the second case, if he would have used a bike to go from A to B and then B to A, then he would have saved on some 2 hours or something. That was the question. So what would have been the time taken if we had walked both ways, and he would have taken some 30 minutes rest? That was the question. That was a very easy question, but it was nicely set between 2 DI sets. So the first DI set got over. There were 3 questions in the first DI set, which was that pie chart based DI, I think. There was a nice question which was at the bottom of the page, and then there were other questions on the other side. So someone who would not really be careful would have felt that the 4 questions on the page would be from that DI set, and so it would have made it probably would have lost out on that question. So these kind of questions were there. Then again, there were a lot of classic traps. So the trap-based questions: boy climbing out of a well. A boy is in the well which is 30 meters deep, and every day the boy climbs 3 meters, but during the night time that boy slides down by 2 meters or something like that. So the trick here was to understand that after the 27th day, the boy would be at 27 meters. On the 28th day, that boy would probably travel 3 meters and would come out of the well. That was the trap there. So I don't know how many people went for that 30 option, but then again, it was a classic trap. It was not very difficult. Then there was this question on bookworm. So we had a book which consisted of 4 volumes, 1, 2, 3, 4. All of them were alike in size and shape and dimension and weight and everything. And all these volumes were 4 centimeters thick, apparently. And they were set such that one could see it from the front and understand which volume is which one. So basically, their spines were facing us. So if a bookworm has to move from the first, or from the cover page or the front cover of the first volume to the back cover of the last volume, how much distance would that worm travel? So the answer was 8 and not 16, as a lot of people might have thought, because if you arrange the books with the spine facing you, then the first page will be nothing but after 4 centimeters, the last page of the last book would be nothing but 4 centimeters from the right hand side. Set theory questions were also, they had traps. So there was this question which had 100 students, out of which some few people play hockey, a few people play football, a few people play cricket, it seems. And there was another set of 200 students, out of which a few people played snakes and ladders, ludo, chess, carom. I think that those were the games. And suddenly the question changed direction and said that out of the people who play outdoor games, that is the overlap. So the second bit of information was, it was not required. It was not used in that question. So probably they designed the question thinking that they would ask some more questions on that thing, or they put it intentionally. That is something that we will never know. But then again, I found it to be a bit weird. So they just added probably one line to make sure that people go away from that question and do not solve it, which was not really a good thing to do, probably. The DI set on passengers, there were 2 DI sets, and both of them had around three questions in the first set and 3 questions in the second set. So we had around 6 to 7 questions in these 2 sets. The sets were easy to read. The sets were not very difficult to read. The DI set on pulse rates, 70 to 74, 75 to 84, and so on. That set was easy to read, and someone who would have figured out the ranking system would have probably done well in this. Overlapping data sets, whenever you have those kind of things. It was tricky, and I for one didn't attempt this set during the paper. But I figured out that it was possible to solve this set if you had some time on hand. Again, the DI set on passengers getting in and out, it looked very confusing at the beginning. So station A contributed to, I think, 45% of the total people who got into that train, and this 45% was of 511 or 360, which was the capacity of the train, was something which was not really known. So a lot of people might have been put off at the start. But then again, if you are clear with the question type which involved people getting in, people going out, and how two things come together and make one data point, that was again the central idea of that entire passage, of the entire set. Uh, Again, I would say not exactly doable, but someone with a good sense of numbers could have done this question. Again, I didn't attempt this question during the test. So both the DI sets I didn't attempt. I solved a couple of questions from the pulse rates set, simply because they were easy. The first question was extremely straightforward, so you could have simply looked at that question and you could have figured out. But the other two were slightly difficult. So that was the only question which I did from DI, and I think a lot of people would have done the same thing. If you look at the split of the section, there were a good 4 or 5 questions from geometry, and a lot of these questions were not really correct. If I were to say, I don't know, the way in which the figures were drawn was not really great, especially the one which involved that alpha. So I think a lot of people remember the question which was there, which was based on alpha. Basically there was the circle drawn and the alignment was not proper. So I think they meant to say that it was a right angle triangle and O was the center and some AB was the diameter, but I think they missed out on that fact. And again, so I for one mark 135 is the answer, because Snap has been known to not change questions and not give marks for incorrect questions. So I probably took that risk there, and I think a lot of people took that risk. 135, I think a few people marked 135 is the answer. So that was there. Around 10 questions were there from arithmetic, simple questions based on your simple ratio and proportion or averages and those kind of questions. Not very difficult. Allegations probably, if you could have applied that thing as well. So not very difficult. Surprisingly, there was nothing from simple interest, compound interest. Also, there weren't any dense allegation based questions. So you did not really have mixtures from which replacements were done twice or thrice, or those kind of questions were not there. Simple interest, compound interest, I couldn't find anything in the paper. So again, I think the arithmetic part was fairly easy. Basically, if you want to make arithmetic difficult, then you will have questions from SICI and mixtures and allegations. But that was not the case, and so the paper could have been said to be on the easier side, especially for arithmetic. There were a handful of questions from numbers, so that was the surprising part for me. Snap never really used to have questions based on factorials or base systems or division or something like that. But today we had everything. We had questions from factorials, of course, wherein we had to find the last digit of an algebraic expression multiplied by 1 factorial raised to 1 factorial plus 2 factorial raised to 2 factorial till 100 factorial raised to 100 factorial and so on. So that was one question. Then again, we had another question on factorials. We even had a question on log of tan 1 degrees, log of tan 2 degrees till log of tan 89 degrees and so on. So that was again something which I don't know, slightly above Snap level, I would say. Set theory, again, as I said, it contributed. One question was there, that was the indoor-outdoor question. There was another question on set theory. Permutations, combinations was easy. It was not very difficult. So we had a question on the number of tickets that need to be issued, which was again from a previous year's Snap sprint series. So we had run this series for 10 days before Snap, and I could figure out at least 4 or 5 questions from that series, including the one which had that the number of tickets. It was a classic question. It had been asked in Snap before. There was another question which was based on there being an equilateral triangle. The midpoints are joined to form another equilateral triangle, and the process is continued till infinity. What is the area, or what is the perimeter of all those triangles or something like that. So that was again a question which was from Snap. I think it was there in yesterday's sprint. So that was one of the first questions that I saw. And again, there were a few questions which were doable. So again, simply because the section was difficult, 18 to 20 has got nothing to do with the easiness of or whatever the amount of questions or the topics from which these questions came, but 18 to 20 would be simply because people would have looked at that section and probably would have got scared, and few people would have got stuck somewhere. and that's why they would not have been able to attempt all the easy questions. So that is why we peg it down at a bit lower than people might actually feel. So I think there were around 25 odd questions which were easy, 25 to 27 questions that were easy. But simply because overall the section was difficult, a lot of people would have failed to spot those 2 or 3 easy questions. And that's why the attempt would come down. So 20 to 22, if you are scoring, then it would be a good score, a good strong score. Anything in the 20s would be great. 25 would be outstanding in this paper, I feel. So someone would have scored about 25, would have just, of course, attempted around 30 questions, which would be great in this section. I see very few people attempting 30 questions in this paper. I see very few people attempting 20 in this paper. So then again, around 25, if you are getting, great, you're done well. If you're getting somewhere in the 20s, then good. If you're getting somewhere around 18, 19, 20, which would be the case for a lot of you, I think you're done a fair job. You should not really worry about this section as such. Now coming to the VARC part of it, VARC was again, it was routine snap. Again, a lot of questions were not exactly repeated, but you would have seen them in some capacity or the other. The vocabulary questions were not very difficult. To be very fair, the vocabulary questions were extremely straightforward, extremely simple. The vocab questions were not difficult at all. If you had a casual reading habit, I think you should have done well in the vocab-based questions. And the vocab-based questions were almost 50% of the paper, including your filling the blank. So it was almost 15 to 20 questions that you had, and these could have been solved in around 4 or 5 minutes. So they were that easy. 2 RCs were present, and both the RCs were fairly long. So Snap started reducing this length of its RCs some time back, and we had good half-page RCs or 1-page RCs max. Today the RCs were slightly longer, 1.5 pages, and they were difficult to read. So the passages were not, as in the central idea was not very difficult to understand. The first one was on Germany and France and how they have probably opposing views on the whole Eurozone crisis thing. So that was there. The other was on the process of liquefaction. How do you use that liquefaction methodology, and what all elements can you, what all things can you get from that thing, and how this sludge operates, and those kind of things. So it was not very difficult. But then again, if you sat and read the entire passage, then it would have been very difficult for you. So someone who is in that cat mode of reading passages first and then answering questions would have probably taken some time getting used to this idea. That these passages are not really meant to be solved that way. And even if you look at the questions and the options were lifted directly from the passage. So the questions were simply, the question simply asked, why is Germany not really doing these kind of things, or why is the year 1945 mentioned in the passage? And the answer option was exactly as it was mentioned in the passage. So there was nothing to be done there. What are the authors hopeful of regarding the Eurozone crisis? It was exactly lifted from that passage. Who has written the passage, or this passage is an excerpt, or this passage is a review of the book written by, again, it was exactly lifted from the passage. So the good thing about this was that you need not spend a lot of time. So I for one started solving RCs when there were 15 minutes remaining, and I think I solved both the RCs in some 7-8 minutes flat. So that would ideally have been the case with a lot of aspirants. Reading the passage and then going to the questions was not really a good idea, because the passage has a lot of gibberish, and if you were probably aware, then you could have simply looked at the question, looked at the option, and you could have marked it right away after locating that thing in the passage. Again, vocabulary was straightforward, as I said, and one could have easily got 70 to 80%. So one would have prepared, probably if you were prepared for NMAT as well. NMAT vocabulary was slightly more difficult compared to Snap. That's what I felt. Snap was more of daily usage, I would say. So people would have been reading editorials and quality news. Those people would have been benefited. This was not really your word power made easy kind of stuff, but it was more of reading your normal newspapers, probably dealing with confused word sets. So discrete versus discrete, ingenious versus ingenuous, advice versus advice. So if you were good with these kind of things, then you could have easily solved your vocabulary. So this is not really something which people learn from your vocabulary books or from word lists, but this is your daily usage thing that you will be benefiting from. Grammar and filling the blanks questions were extremely easy. The grammar questions were very easy. Some 3 or 4 the grammar questions were there, and they were very, very, very easy, to be very frank. uh, the errors were obvious, and algae was supposed to be a plural, but then again it becomes it. So you should have jumped to a singular. More higher, more highest. That was again painful to even read that question, but they were very easy to solve. Um, Again, there were not a lot of areas in this section which can be termed as difficult, and it was not even time consuming. The only way in which you could have got lost in this section would have been if you would have read those RCs. And I think that a lot of people go to Snap understanding very well that you need not read the entire passage. So a lot of people would have scored here, and people who were good at verbal, people who weren't really good at verbal, this section would not really be something which will create a difference. Probably your AR and your QA sections will be the ones which will create a difference, but this section for me will not create a difference. Someone who has prepared well will score somewhere around 30, probably 35 marks in this section. If someone is extremely good, someone who is not really great at this section would score somewhere around 25, 26 marks. So that is something which I feel is the takeaway from here, and that will not really translate into your final score. Again, 1/3 of your score will come from this section, is what I can understand. So if you are aspiring to get into SIBM or get a call from SIBM, SCMHRD, I think you should hope for somewhere around 25 marks in this section. If you are getting more than 25, great. If you are getting less than 25, probably you are on the edge when it comes to your overall performance. I saw a lot of people who had attempted more than 35 questions. So 35 to 40 questions is something which a lot of people have attempted. Again, a few people would have attempted 30 to 35 questions, and it depends on your risk appetite. In verbal, if I am attempting the paper, then I have a huge risk appetite. I will take a lot of risks. People who are not really great at risk taking will go for a conservative thing, 30-35 questions. But then again, you should be looking at somewhere around 27 to 28 marks in this section. That would be a good score. 30 plus would be great. Now coming to the important part, this is the part which a lot of people are concerned about. Good number of attempts in all these sections, as I mentioned. QADI 20 to 22 would be termed as good. VARC 30 to 35 would be fair. AR 25 to 28 would be a good attempt. GK would be 10 to 12. So that is what the split will look like. So overall, you would have attempted somewhere around 85 to 95 questions is something which you can be hopeful of. Expected score will be again along the similar lines. So you can expect, so as I said here, 74 to 75 marks, your 26 to 27 will come from VARC. These two will be split equally, and this will be somewhere around 10 marks. So that is what a normal scorecard will look like. For someone who gets a call from SIBM, SCMHRD, this is probably how the scorecard will look like. So if you are getting somewhere around 20 in QADI and AR, and getting somewhere around 25 in VARC and 10 around GK, I think you have done well in this paper. And that would amount to a 99%. Last year, I think it was in the early 70s. I think 73 or 74 was the 99 percentile last year. So it will remain at the same region simply because of an easier GK section and because the overall marks have come down from 180 to 150. Expected cutoffs. Yeah. So a lot of people were asking me this, and of course there has to be this thing. My take would be I would not really say it would go above 75 or something. I would say that it would be in mid, I think early 70s. I would say. Having said that, I wouldn't be surprised if the cutoffs go down to higher 69s or probably somewhere around the 70 mark. So if you are getting above 70 marks, I think you can be hopeful of getting a call from the big two, I would say, not the big three, big four, but at least the big two, SIBM, Pune, SCMHRD, probably you can be hopeful of getting a call. For a general candidate, I think 70 to 73 is fine. 75 plus would be great. You will definitely get a call, according to me. 70 plus would probably put you somewhere on the borderline. So 74, 75, as I said, it would be around 99 percentile. 72, 73 will be somewhere around the 97, 98 percentile mark. So depending on the number of takers, number of people they want to call, I think it should be somewhere in the early 70s is what I feel. SIIB, SIBM Bangalore has been typically around the 88, 90 percentile mark, and that would be somewhere around 64, 65 marks. I feel so 10% of the people would have done better than 65 is what I feel. But then again, this is what we are hopeful of at this point in time. So I think we have got a few questions. Yeah, okay. 98 questions attempted. As soon as you say 98, the first thing that comes to my mind is 85 to 95 attempts. If you have got more than 95 attempts, then I think you are already on a good footing. Okay. If you have got 95 attempts and if you have an 85% accuracy, then I would say that you would get somewhere around 80 correct, 15 wrong, which will be around 76 marks. So I think you should be, you should easily get a call irrespective of whether you are a KM candidate or not. Okay, so that should not be a problem. So Ayush, I think you are getting a call if your accuracy is good. This year there are no sectional cutoffs. Yes, hopefully there are no sectional cutoffs. That's what we can understand from whatever communication has been out there. But you never know until the final result comes out. You never know whims and fancies of these institutes. So, but then again, we are pretty hopeful that there will be no sectional cutoffs this year. Can we get the answer keys for SNAP 2016? For that, we have to get the question paper of SNAP 2016, which I think is not allowed legally. But there are always ways of getting around the system. But yeah, I don't think you will get answer keys for SNAP 2016. If you want to discuss any questions, you can probably visit our group and probably you can just discuss your questions there. Okay, so yeah, tips for ZAT. Yeah, I will come to ZAT in a bit. What is the ratio of people taking the test and people getting the call? Again, a tricky business. So people taking the test, we saw last year, right? So 3% of the people, top 3% of the people got a call from SIBM and SCMHRD, around about 3% of the people. So probably you can say that 3% of the people will get a call, and I think the ratio is somewhere around 1:12 or 1:13 if I'm not wrong. So the number of seats multiplied by 12:13. So if you have a group of 10 or 12 students, which is ideally the case, then on an average, one person will get. So that is the ratio generally. SIOM is not a great institute. If you want to do an MBA this year and if you are really interested in operations and if you're not getting into say NEET or probably SPJ in operations or something like that, then probably you can have a look at it. Close to 70 should definitely get you an SIOM call. So SIOM should not be a problem. I think SIOM should be somewhere around the early to mid 60s is what I feel. Slightly less than SIIB and SIBM Bangalore. So that should be fine. So SIOM again, not really great. If you are fixated on SIOM, if you are getting 70, I think you should be through. While circling, it got a little outside. Yeah. So unless it went into some other circle or it went above or below, I think it should not be a problem. A little bit here and there is fine. The OMR simply tries to figure out if you have just blanked it or not. So it should not be a problem. What was the answer to the ship question regarding sinking? Yeah, I thought it was none of these because it would have already. I thought the ship would have already sunk because it was going down at the rate of 2.5 feet per second. I think, and there were 4 feet remaining. So in 2 hours, I think it would have sunk down. So I don't know. The question was on 5.75, I think. 78 to 79 questions, accuracy around 85 to 90 would probably mean that you would get somewhere around 68, 69 correct and around 10 wrong, I would say, which would get you to 67.5 or 66 or something. Slightly difficult. I think you can go for SIBM Bangalore, SIIB. They look possible, but SIBM and SCMHRD look slightly difficult to me. If you are attempted around 80 questions, say, and if you are getting a 90% accuracy, again 90% will, of course, it will be somewhere around 70 correct, 10 wrong. So 67.5 looks a bit far-fetched to me. So yeah, cutoffs for SC, ST, OBC. Yeah, I will reply to it privately. Okay. Do you encircle then and there? What is your strategy? Achha, my strategy. I always attempt it at the end. So after 1 hour 30 minutes, I will go and mark all the bubbles, whatever I have filled till then, and after that I will do one at a time. That has been my strategy since my medical entrance days, wherein we used to have 200 questions, and it works for me. So I have pretty much stuck to it. Answer keys. I don't know. If you have any questions, I can probably tell you what I have answered and if there was any trap or something. But keys, I'm not very sure if we'll be able to publish it or if anybody will be able to publish it. So probably the biggies might publish something, but then again, I don't really know how seriously to take it. So probably you can stop worrying about keys and everything. You can just look at your attempts. You can look at your historical scores. That is probably what you will get in most of the cases. So yeah, I think I've answered a few questions. Regarding the cutoffs, yeah, I will put the cutoffs. I will put a post on the cutoffs later. So probably that is the case. Last date of 1 factorial, 2 factorial, some expansion. I wrote it as 7. I'm not very sure if it's right or not because it was some a raised to x upon b raised to x raised to some big number. So I was hoping that it would come to 1 and the second part would be 7. So that's what I wrote. I'm not very sure if it's right or not. This one is the 1 factorial raised to 1 factorial. Should GK and verbal have been attempted first and then quant and LR? Yes, I feel. But then again, it depends on your candidature. I always like to put a lot of attempts under my belt in the first 30 odd minutes so that I have a lot of time at the end. So even for IFT, even for IFT especially, generally I will start with GK, 10 minutes GK, 20 minutes verbal, and then whatever time remains, the next 1 hour, probably 30 to quant and LR, and then 30 minutes buffer is what I feel. Percentile requirement for SIBM last year, somewhere around 97 percentile is what I think. It should have been the case. So if you are getting about 97 percentile, I think you should be hopeful about. What is the answer to number of zeros in factorial question? I think that was 120 or something, I think was the answer. I'm not very sure. The smallest one, the first one. Circle, Ebola, figure, eclipse, wala visualing answer. I don't know. I marked some amoeba. Yeah, I think it was 120. Sai is right, I guess. Yeah, you have any questions on the strategy or cutoffs or whatever things were there? I don't think questions will be able to answer a lot of questions here. So yeah, that's about it. That's the thing. Angle asked in triangle. Not very sure which one you're talking about. 15, 30, 45, 60. I think it was 60. It found the base two angles were total to 120 degrees, and so the angle at the top theta was 60. Is what I felt. The other circle-based question, I think it was 135. Yeah, but that is my take. I'm not very sure if it was right or not. But yeah, I think it was right. 135 was the incorrect one. The figure was not oriented properly. So, but I wrote 135 because Snap generally does not give marks to these kind of questions. Okay, so I hope a lot of queries have been cleared. If you have had any nerves, probably it would have been alleviated by now. Regarding ZAT, I will come to it later. We will probably have a session separately for ZAT. So I don't know if talking about ZAT right now makes any sense. One thing, I'm not very prepared for that thing. And I can, of course, go on and on. But I think it would be better if I go for an organized session instead of just rambling. GK US Vice President, I think it's Joe Biden. If I'm not wrong. But yeah, you can discuss those questions later. That's not really the point of it. Okay. So I think you guys did well in this paper, and I hope a few questions you get to know a lot of questions in the coming few hours or so. So let's see how it goes. We'll get a better picture once all the institutes come up with their cutoffs as well. So we'll get a fair picture then. As of now, I think that 72, 73 is justified, and I'm generally not way off target when it comes to cutoffs. So I think they should be the case. So great. If there are no more questions, I think we can wrap this up. You guys can also have a bit of a rest after the day that was today. Yeah. If there are any other queries, you can post it on our group. I will just post the URL here. So I think a lot of you are already part of that group. But if you aren't, probably you can join that group. And if you have any doubts, any questions or something, you can just put it there. And probably we will get back to you. Fine. So I'll just wrap up this session if everybody is fine with it. Okay, I think there are no more questions, so I will just wrap it up. Great. Sure. So all the best, all of you. Sorry, yeah. So all the best, all of you, and hope you do well. Yeah, I will come to your cutoffs. I've seen your chat, so I will just, you can ping me on FB. I will let you know the cutoffs. So I'll just finish this thing. I'll wrap this thing up. And Chalo, great having you here. All the best, all of you, and I'll close this session now. Thank you.